The crack of palm against cheek echoed through the cabin like a thunderclap. Seat 14B. The slap came so fast that most passengers thought they'd imagined it. But Sandra Davis felt every molecule of that humiliation burn across her face as 200 strangers turned to stare. The man in 14A, red-faced and trembling with entitlement, had just made the worst decision of his entire life. He didn't know that the quiet woman he'd just assaulted had spent 15 years documenting corporate discrimination cases. He didn't know her phone had captured everything. And he definitely didn't know who was about to walk through that aircraft door in exactly 10 minutes. What happened next didn't just destroy one man's life. It rewrote the entire airline's legal history. If you want to see how one moment of violence became a masterclass in consequences, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what this lawyer did when she walked on board, you won't believe it until you see it unfold. The crack of palm against cheek echoed through the cabin like a thunderclap. Seat 14B. The slap came so fast that most passengers thought they'd imagined it. But Sandra Davis felt every molecule of that humiliation burn across her face as 200 strangers turned to stare. The man in 14A, red-faced and trembling with entitlement, had just made the worst decision of his entire life. He didn't know that the quiet woman he'd just assaulted had spent 15 years documenting corporate discrimination cases. He didn't know her phone had captured everything. And he definitely didn't know who was about to walk through that aircraft door in exactly 10 minutes. What happened next didn't just destroy one man's life. It rewrote the entire airline's legal history. If you want to see how one moment of violence became a masterclass in consequences, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what this lawyer did when she walked on board, you won't believe it until you see it unfold. 20 minutes earlier, Sandra had smiled at the gate agent, her carry-on perfectly within regulation size, her boarding pass already pulled up on her phone. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse, professional, unremarkable, the kind of outfit designed to make her invisible in corporate America. At 43, she'd learned that invisibility was sometimes a weapon. The flight to Chicago was routine, another business trip in an endless series of business trips. Except Sandra's business was destruction. She destroyed careers built on discrimination. She destroyed companies that protected predators. She destroyed the illusion that power insulated anyone from consequences. Harold Mitchell had been drinking at the airport bar since noon. Sandra noticed him immediately when she reached row 14, the way alcoholics always notice each other. Except Sandra had been sober for 12 years, and Harold was on his 4th whiskey. He sat in 14A, window seat, his bulk spilling slightly into the middle seat that would remain mercifully empty. When Sandra moved to take 14B, aisle seat, Harold's eyes tracked her movement with the lazy contempt of a man who'd never faced real opposition. "You sure you're in the right section?" His voice carried that particular thickness of day drinking mixed with something uglier. "Economy's behind us." Sandra placed her bag in the overhead compartment without looking at him. She'd heard every variation of this script. The assumption that she didn't belong in first class. The implication coded in tone rather than direct accusation. She settled into her seat, pulled out her tablet, opened the case file she'd been reviewing. The silence lasted maybe 90 seconds. "I'm just saying, mistakes happen." Harold shifted in his seat, his voice louder now, performing for an audience that wasn't watching. "Wouldn't want you to be embarrassed when they check tickets." A flight attendant approached, her smile professionally frozen. "Is everything all right here?" Harold leaned forward. "Just wanted to make sure seating assignments were correct." "Lot of confusion these days." The flight attendant's eyes flicked to Sandra, and Sandra saw the calculation happen in real time. The easier path, the path of least resistance. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Sandra held up her phone without a word. "First class, seat 14B, confirmed and paid for." The flight attendant's smile tightened. "Everything appears to be in order." "Sir, is there something specific you need?" Harold waved her away, but the seed was planted. The flight attendant knew something was wrong but chose the coward's path, ignoring it, hoping it would resolve itself, prioritizing her own comfort over intervention. Sandra made a mental note. Witness number 1. Inadequate response documented. The aircraft filled with the usual chaos of boarding. Overhead bins slamming, children crying, businessmen shouting into phones for those final precious seconds of connectivity. Sandra watched Harold in her peripheral vision. His jaw worked steadily, grinding something between anger and alcohol. His hands gripped the armrests too tightly. She'd seen this before. Men like Harold carried their rage like luggage, waiting for any excuse to unpack it. The excuse came when Sandra's elbow accidentally brushed the shared armrest as she adjusted her seatbelt. Just the slightest contact. The kind of minor intrusion that happens 1,000 times on every flight. Harold jerked his arm away as if she'd burned him. "Can you not?" His voice was acid. "Some of us paid for this seat and expect a little personal space." Sandra turned to face him directly for the first time. Her voice was quiet, controlled. The voice she used in depositions when she wanted every word recorded with crystal clarity. "I apologize. It was accidental." "Sure it was." Harold's face had gone from red to purple. "You people always have an excuse. Always taking up space you don't belong in, making everyone else uncomfortable, playing the victim when someone finally says something." The cabin went quiet, not silent. Engines still hummed, air still circulated, but conversation ceased in the immediate vicinity. Passengers in rows 13 and 15 suddenly became fascinated with their phones, their magazines, anything but the confrontation unfolding in their sight line. The flight attendant who'd checked Sandra's boarding pass was now 3 rows back, pretending she couldn't hear. Another flight attendant stood at the front of the cabin, frozen, waiting for someone else to handle it. Sandra reached into her blazer pocket with deliberate slowness. She pulled out her phone, opened the camera app, and placed it on her tray table angled toward Harold. The red recording dot glowed like an accusation. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harold's voice climbed an octave. "Documenting." Sandra's voice remained level. "Continue, please. You were explaining how I don't belong here." That's when Harold snapped. He lunged across the empty middle seat, his hand connecting with Sandra's face in a slap that snapped her head sideways and sent her glasses flying into the aisle. The phone clattered onto her lap, still recording. The sound of impact seemed to ripple through the entire aircraft. A collective gasp, followed by horrified silence. Sandra's cheek bloomed red immediately, the imprint of Harold's palm visible like a brand. Her eyes watered involuntarily, but she didn't make a sound. She simply picked up her phone with steady hands, stopped the recording, and saved it. Then she took 3 photos of Harold's face, capturing his expression. That mixture of rage and sudden fear as reality began penetrating his alcohol fog. She photographed her own face using the phone's front camera. She photographed the empty seats around them, documenting which passengers had witnessed everything and chosen silence. 2 flight attendants finally rushed over, their earlier paralysis broken by undeniable violence. "Sir, you need to calm down immediately." "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Sandra touched her cheek gently, testing for damage. "I need the captain informed that a passenger has committed assault. I need your names and employee numbers. I need the names of every crew member who witnessed the preceding harassment and failed to intervene. And I need to make a phone call before we taxi." The lead flight attendant, an older woman named Patricia, according to her name tag, hesitated. "Ma'am, we're about to push back. Phone calls aren't—" "Then delay the pushback." Sandra's voice carried a new edge now, something sharp and legal and absolutely final. "Because if this aircraft moves 1 inch with that man on board before I make this call, your airline's liability extends from simple assault to false imprisonment. Your choice. Patricia's face went pale. She spoke into her radio, quick and urgent. 2 minutes later, the captain's voice came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay due to a security matter. Please remain seated." "This shouldn't take long," Sandra dialed. The phone rang twice before a woman answered, her voice alert despite the late hour in whatever time zone she was calling. Sandra's words were precise, clipped, deadly calm. "Gate 12. 10 minutes. Bring everything." Harold Mitchell had no idea who he'd just slapped. The passengers around him had no idea. Even the flight crew, now gathered in worried clusters near the galley, had no idea. But in exactly 8 minutes, everyone on Flight 1847 would learn that Sandra Davis wasn't just another business traveler. She was a weapon disguised as a middle-aged woman with perfect posture and reading glasses. Sandra's business card, tucked in her wallet, read Senior Litigation Specialist at Morrison, Chen and Associates. What it didn't say was that she'd spent 15 years becoming the attorney that corporations feared most. Her specialty was discrimination cases that other lawyers considered unwinnable, the ones where the evidence was circumstantial, where the company's lawyers were vicious, where the victims had been systematically discredited before they even filed suit. Sandra won them anyway. She'd extracted $47 million in settlements over her career. 3 executives had gone to prison because of her investigations. 2 Fortune 500 companies had rewritten their entire HR policies after Sandra was done with them. But more than the money or the policy changes, Sandra collected something else. Evidence. She documented everything. Every eye roll from a colleague, every suspicious performance review, every meeting where she was the only woman, the only person of color, the only one whose ideas got attributed to someone else. She kept spreadsheets of incidents, voice recordings of conversations, screenshots of emails. For 15 years, she'd been building a database of how discrimination actually worked in American corporate culture. Not the dramatic, lawsuit-ready moments, but the 1,000 tiny cuts that bled people dry. Harold's slap wasn't 1,000 tiny cuts. It was a chainsaw. While they waited for whatever Sandra's phone call had set in motion, Harold sat in his seat with his arms crossed, his earlier rage giving way to sullen defiance. "She provoked me," he told Patricia, the lead flight attendant. "Kept invading my space, playing that race card. You saw how she started recording me. Sir, I'm going to need you to stop talking." Patricia's voice had gone from customer service smooth to administrative steel. The airline's legal department would have her head. If Harold said anything else, they'd have to report. Too late, though. Sandra's phone was recording again, propped on her tray table, capturing every word. Sandra examined her face in her phone's camera. The handprint was already darkening to purple, a perfect impression of Harold's palm across her cheek. In 12 hours, it would be spectacular. Deep purple, maybe some green around the edges. She took another photo, made a note of the timestamp. In her mind, she was already constructing the timeline that would appear in court documents. Time of initial harassment, time of inadequate crew response, time of escalation, time of assault, time of post-assault statements. Every detail mattered. Every detail would matter in what came next. The other passengers had started whispering among themselves, that peculiar airplane whisper that's somehow louder than normal conversation. Sandra heard fragments of their discussions. "Did you see that? Should we say something? I don't want to get involved." "But he hit her." "Yeah, but what if there's more to the story?" "She was recording him. That's kind of aggressive." "Still doesn't justify violence." Sandra made notes of which passengers seemed sympathetic, which seemed hostile, which seemed desperate to pretend nothing had happened. Potential witnesses, potential character witnesses, potential defendants, if it came to that. Failure to intervene had its own legal implications in some jurisdictions. She wasn't vindictive, but she was thorough. Everyone who'd watched this happen and done nothing would receive a visit from an investigator asking what they'd seen and why they'd chosen silence. Their discomfort would be educational. Harold's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and Sandra watched his face cycle through confusion, then alarm. He started typing frantically, then stopped, looked toward Sandra with something that might have been dawning comprehension. His social media. Sandra would bet money that Harold was just now realizing his social media was public, that his Facebook posts about those people and political correctness gone mad were archived somewhere, that his Twitter rants about affirmative action and DEI initiatives were screenshot and backed up, that his LinkedIn, professional, buttoned up, LinkedIn had that one comment thread where he'd said something about diversity hires lowering standards that he'd thought was reasonable at the time. Sandra hadn't looked at Harold's social media yet. She didn't need to, but her associate Rachel would be doing that right now, running Harold's name through every database and search engine, pulling up everything he'd ever posted, commented on, or liked. By the time this was over, they'd know more about Harold Mitchell than Harold knew about himself. The captain's voice crackled over the PA system again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have someone boarding the aircraft. Please remain patient. We appreciate your cooperation." Harold's head snapped up. "Someone boarding? We're supposed to be leaving. I have a connection in Chicago. This is ridiculous." He started to stand, but Patricia put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, sit down. Now." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Harold's face. The alcohol was wearing off, reality was settling in, and whatever bravado had sustained him through the assault was crumbling. He looked at Sandra, really looked at her, and seemed to see something that made his face go pale. "Who are you?" His voice was small now, uncertain. "Who did you call?" Sandra checked her watch. 7 minutes since her call. Michelle would be walking through security right now, her diplomatic credentials bypassing the usual delays. Michelle, who'd graduated top of her class at Yale Law. Michelle, who'd clerked for a federal judge and learned every procedural trick in the book. Michelle, who had never, not once in 14 years of practice, lost a civil rights case in federal court. Michelle, her law partner, her best friend, and the most terrifying attorney Sandra had ever met. Sandra didn't answer Harold's question. She simply turned back to her tablet and pulled up a document. The airline's passenger Bill of Rights. Their public statements about tolerance and inclusion. Their corporate diversity initiatives that looked impressive on paper. She started marking passages, highlighting contradictions between policy and practice. This flight crew's failure to intervene would cost the airline more than money. It would cost them their carefully cultivated public image. The aircraft door opened. Every head turned toward the front of the cabin. A woman walked through, mid-30s, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed federal courthouse, carrying a briefcase in one hand and a file folder in the other. Michelle Chen moved like a shark through water, smooth, purposeful, absolutely certain of her dominion. Her eyes found Sandra immediately, assessed the visible injury with one clinical glance, then swept across the cabin, taking in the scene with perfect comprehension. She walked directly to row 14, stood in the aisle, looked down at Harold Mitchell with an expression that contained no anger, no disgust, just perfect, professional clarity. When she spoke, her voice carried through the entire first-class cabin with courtroom precision. "Mr. Mitchell, my name is Michelle Chen. I'm Sandra's law partner, and I'm here to inform you of something very important." She paused, let the silence stretch, let Harold's fear grow. "I'm not here to have you arrested, though that will happen shortly. I'm not here to file charges, though those are already being prepared. I'm here to make sure you understand exactly what you've just done to yourself, because in about 30 seconds, your life as you know it is going to end." Harold's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Michelle opened her file folder, pulled out a document, and held it where he could see it. It was an investigation report, Official letterhead from the Department of Transportation, case number clearly visible. This airline is currently under federal investigation for 14 incidents of racial discrimination in the past 18 months. Your assault on Sandra, captured on video with 200 witnesses, just became incident number 15. Congratulations, Mr. Mitchell. You're about to become the case study that costs this airline approximately $40 million in federal fines and consent decree penalties. Patricia, the lead flight attendant, made a small choking sound. The captain appeared from the cockpit, his face ashen. Michelle didn't even glance at them. But that's their problem, Michelle continued, her voice dropping lower, more intimate, more terrifying. Your problem is much more personal. You assaulted a woman in front of 200 witnesses. You made racially charged statements that were recorded on video. And Sandra's firm happens to specialize in civil rights litigation. We're going to sue you personally. We're going to sue you professionally. We're going to sue every entity you're connected to. And here's the beautiful part, Harold. Can I call you Harold? We're going to win. We always win. Sandra watched Harold's face and saw the exact moment his world collapsed. It wasn't anger or defiance anymore. It was the pure animal terror of a man who'd finally realized he'd wandered into a trap he didn't even know existed. Michelle smiled, sharp, predatory, satisfied. Now, Harold, I have a proposition for you, and I strongly suggest you listen very, very carefully. Harold Mitchell had exactly one moment where he thought he might escape this. One brief, shining second where he believed Michelle Chen's presence meant police, lawyers, the normal machinery of justice that rich white men had learned to navigate with expensive attorneys and carefully worded apologies. That moment died the instant Michelle opened her briefcase and pulled out not handcuffs, but a contract. This is a settlement agreement and confession, Michelle said, her voice carrying to every corner of the first-class cabin. She wasn't trying to be quiet. Privacy was a luxury Harold had forfeited the moment his palm connected with Sandra's face. You're going to read it. You're going to understand it. And then you're going to sign it. Right here, right now, with every passenger on this aircraft as witnesses. Harold found his voice, though it came out strangled. I'm not signing anything without my lawyer, Michelle smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Call your lawyer, please. I'll wait. But understand that every minute you delay, I'm adding another zero to the damages we're seeking. Your lawyer will tell you to sign. They'll tell you to sign fast. Because, Harold, your options right now are very, very simple. Sign this agreement, which includes a full confession to assault, a commitment to complete court-mandated anger management and anti-racism training, a public apology, and a payment of $200,000 to Sandra, or face criminal charges for assault, federal civil rights charges that carry up to 10 years in prison, and a civil lawsuit that will consume every asset you own, every asset your wife owns, and every asset you'll earn for the rest of your working life. The color drained from Harold's face. 200,000? That's insane. I'll fight this. Sandra spoke for the first time since Michelle arrived, her voice quiet but absolutely clear. Harold, look at me. He did, reluctantly. Do you know what I do for a living? Do you understand who you assaulted? Michelle pulled out her phone and began reading from the screen. Sandra Davis, Senior Litigation Specialist. $47 million in settlements over 15 years. 93% success rate in discrimination cases. Last year alone, she secured an $8 million verdict against Brennan Tech for workplace discrimination. The year before, $12 million against Hartford Financial. She specializes in cases that seem unwinnable. Cases where the defendants think they're protected by money, lawyers, and institutional power. She destroys them anyway. Harold's hands were shaking now. Michelle continued, relentless. Now about those federal charges. This airline, the one whose aircraft you're currently sitting in, is already under investigation by the Department of Transportation for systematic racial discrimination. 14 documented incidents in 18 months. Complaints filed. Investigations opened. federal attorneys circling. Your assault on Sandra just became the 15th incident, the one that proves a pattern, the one that transforms this from an internal airline matter into a federal civil rights case. A man in a dark suit appeared from the front of the aircraft, walking quickly down the aisle. He looked terrified. His badge identified him as Gerald Torres, Regional Operations Manager for the airline. He'd clearly been summoned from the terminal, probably interrupted dinner, definitely interrupted his evening. He looked at Sandra's bruised face, at Michelle's predatory stance, at Harold's visible panic, and his expression became that of a man calculating exactly how much this was about to cost his company. Ms. Chen, Ms. Davis. Gerald's voice was professionally neutral, but Sandra could hear the resignation underneath. I've been briefed on the situation. On behalf of the airline, I want to apologize and assure you that we take this matter with the utmost seriousness. Michelle turned to him with laser focus. Mr. Torres, your flight crew witnessed Mr. Mitchell's harassment of my partner for approximately 15 minutes before the assault occurred. They checked her boarding pass, as if her presence in first class was suspicious, but failed to address his obvious hostile behavior. After the assault, they delayed intervention. We have all of this documented on video. How seriously does your airline actually take discrimination when it's happening in real time? Gerald's professional mask cracked slightly. We'll conduct a full investigation. You'll conduct nothing, Michelle interrupted. The federal investigation is already open. This incident will be added to the existing case file by tomorrow morning. What you will do is provide us with the names and personnel files of every crew member on this flight, security footage from the gate and aircraft, and passenger manifest information. You'll do this within 24 hours, or we'll add obstruction to the complaint. Sandra watched the other passengers. They'd been leaning forward, straining to hear every word, their phones mostly down now because they understood they were witnessing something significant. A woman in row 13, maybe 50, well-dressed, had tears on her cheeks. A younger man across the aisle was recording on his phone, though Sandra doubted Michelle minded. More witnesses, more documentation, more pressure. An older couple in row 15 sat rigid with discomfort, probably realizing they'd have to give statements about what they'd seen and what they'd failed to do. Michelle pulled another document from her briefcase. Harold, while you're considering my generous offer, let me share something interesting my associate discovered in the last 8 minutes. Your social media history is fascinating. Facebook posts about those people ruining neighborhoods. Twitter rants about diversity initiatives. A particularly charming LinkedIn comment about affirmative action being reverse discrimination. We've archived everything. Deleted posts? We have those too. That comment you made about your coworker Janice being a diversity hire who couldn't hack it? We found it. We found all of it. Harold's face went from pale to gray. That's private. It's public, Harold. You posted it publicly. And now it's evidence of a pattern of racist behavior that makes this assault not a momentary loss of control, but the inevitable result of sustained prejudice. A jury will see those posts. Your employer will see those posts. Your wife will see those posts. Everyone you know will see those posts. Sandra checked her watch. Harold, you have 2 minutes to decide. Sign the agreement or we proceed with criminal and civil charges. Michelle's offer expires when those 2 minutes are up. And trust me, you'll never get terms this generous again. Harold looked around desperately, as if someone might intervene, might save him, might offer an escape route that didn't exist. The other passengers avoided his gaze. Gerald Torres certainly wasn't going to help. He was busy calculating his own company's liability. The flight crew stood clustered near the galley, their inadequate response coming back to haunt them in real time. This isn't fair, Harold whispered. You're forcing me. Fair? Sandra's voice cut through his protest like a knife. You assaulted me because I'm black and had the audacity to sit in first class. You harassed me for 15 minutes while crew members and passengers did nothing. You slapped me hard enough to leave a bruise that will last 2 weeks. And now you want to talk about fare? Michelle placed the contract on Harold's tray table along with a pen. 60 seconds, Harold. After that, the deal's off the table and we see you in federal court. Your choice. Harold's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. Harold Mitchell signed his name on 5 separate pages, while 200 passengers watched in absolute silence. Each signature was witnessed by Michelle, Gerald Torres, and Patricia, the flight attendant, whose hands also shook as she added her name to the document. Michelle filmed the entire process on her phone. The timestamp and Harold's face clearly visible as he signed away $200,000. His pride and any remaining illusion of control over his own narrative. When the last signature was complete, Michelle photographed every page of the signed document, uploaded the images to a secure server, and only then did she step back. Thank you, Harold. That was the smartest decision you've made all day. Police will be here shortly to take your statement and formally arrest you. The criminal charges are separate from this agreement. You understand that, correct? Harold's voice was barely audible. You said if I signed... I said you could sign this or face criminal charges and a devastating civil suit. You chose to sign this and face criminal charges. Still better than your alternative. Michelle's smile was cold comfort. The assault happened. The evidence exists. The confession is signed. The state will prosecute. But at least you won't lose your house in the civil suit. Small victories, Harold. 2 airport police officers arrived, their presence making the situation feel suddenly, terrifyingly real for Harold. They read him his rights, the Miranda warning sounding surreal in the confined space of an aircraft cabin, and placed him in handcuffs. As they escorted him down the aisle toward the exit, every passenger watched. Some filmed it on their phones. Others simply stared. Harold's humiliation was complete and public and irreversible. Gerald Torres remained behind, his face ashen. Michelle turned to him with the same clinical precision she'd applied to Harold. Mr. Torres, let's discuss your airline's liability. 14 previous incidents, inadequate crew training, failure to intervene in obvious harassment, a corporate culture that prioritizes conflict avoidance over passenger safety. The Department of Transportation investigation will likely result in a consent decree requiring comprehensive policy changes, mandatory training, and monitoring for the next 5 years. Fines will probably run between $30 and $50 million. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Ms. Chen, I'm not authorized to negotiate. I'm not negotiating with you, Michelle interrupted. I'm informing you. Your CEO will receive a formal complaint tomorrow morning. The DOT will receive our supplementary evidence by noon. And unless your airline wants to become the poster child for how not to handle discrimination, you'll cooperate fully with the federal investigation and implement every recommendation they make. Sandra stood up for the first time since Michelle arrived. She moved slowly, deliberately, walking to the front of the first-class cabin where she could see most of the passengers. When she spoke, her voice carried that same quiet authority she used in courtrooms. I want everyone here to understand something. What happened today wasn't random. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of a system that protects men like Harold and silences women like me. Some of you watched him harass me for 15 minutes. You said nothing. You looked away. You hoped someone else would intervene. Your silence enabled his violence. The passengers shifted uncomfortably. The woman in row 13 who'd been crying looked down at her hands. The man who'd been recording nodded slowly, as if accepting his own complicity. Sandra continued, Michelle will be reaching out to each of you for witness statements. You'll be asked what you saw, what you heard, and what you chose to do about it. Some of you will claim you didn't notice. Some will minimize what happened. Some will tell the truth. The truth is what will change this airline's policies and protect the next person who sits in seat 14B. Michelle began distributing business cards, walking down the aisle and handing one to each passenger. You have 72 hours to contact our office with your statement. If we don't hear from you, we'll assume you have nothing to contribute and note your non-cooperation in our report to federal investigators." The passengers took the cards with varying expressions: shame, resignation, defiance, understanding. One man in row 16 spoke up, his voice hesitant. "What if we're afraid of retaliation? If we testify against the airline?" "Then you tell us that," Michelle said. "Retaliation against witnesses in a federal investigation is a crime. We'll protect you, but you have to be willing to tell the truth." Sandra walked back to her seat, collected her belongings, and turned to Gerald Torres one final time. "There's something else you should know. Something I haven't told Michelle yet." She paused, letting the tension build. "Last year, my daughter flew on this airline. She's military, Army lieutenant, 2 tours overseas, Bronze Star. She wore her uniform because she was proud. Your gate agent flagged her as suspicious, held her at the gate, searched her bags in front of everyone, made her miss her flight. She filed a complaint. Your airline sent her a form letter apology and a $50 voucher." The air in the cabin seemed to thicken. Gerald's face went from ashen to gray. Michelle's eyes sharpened. This was new information even to her, and Sandra could see her partner's brilliant legal mind already incorporating this revelation into their case strategy. "So when Harold slapped me today," Sandra continued, her voice steady despite the emotion underneath, "it wasn't just about me. It was about my daughter. It was about every black woman who's been told she doesn't belong somewhere she has every right to be. It was about every person who's been harassed, discriminated against, and then gaslit about their own experience. This wasn't random, Gerald. I chose this flight. I chose this airline. I knew your investigation was ongoing. I was gathering evidence for my own complaint when Harold gave me something much better, a federal case that will force systematic change." Michelle's expression shifted from predatory focus to something deeper, pride mixed with understanding. "Sandra, you should have told me." "I needed to know it was real," Sandra said. "I needed to know whether your airline would protect a passenger or protect its own reputation. Now I know. Now everyone knows. Gerald Torres looked like he might be sick. Ms. Davis, your daughter's case, we can review it, reopen it, provide compensation." "You'll do more than that," Michelle said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You'll add it to the list of incidents in the federal investigation. You'll acknowledge your failure, and you'll implement changes that ensure it never happens to anyone's daughter again." Sandra picked up her carry-on bag, straightened her blazer, and touched her bruised cheek gently. The pain was still there, but it felt different now. Not like humiliation, but like evidence, like power, like change. She looked directly at the camera of the passenger who'd been recording everything. "My name is Sandra Davis. I'm a senior litigation specialist. I've spent 15 years fighting discrimination in corporate America. Today, I became the story I usually tell in court. And I want everyone watching this video to understand something. You have power. When you witness injustice, you have power. Your silence protects perpetrators. Your voice protects victims. Choose wisely." Michelle closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. "We're done here. Sandra, let's get you to a hospital for documentation of your injuries. Mr. Torres, you have your instructions. Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the cabin at large, "thank you for your cooperation. Those who choose to remain silent will have to live with that choice. Those who choose to speak up will help change an entire industry." As Sandra and Michelle walked down the aisle toward the exit, the passengers began to move, to whisper, to process what they'd just witnessed. Some were already typing statements on their phones. Others sat frozen, confronting their own complicity. The woman in row 13 called out, "Ms. Davis?" Sandra turned. "I'm sorry. I should have said something. I was afraid. And that's not an excuse, but I'm sorry." Sandra's expression softened slightly. "Then tell the truth in your statement. That's how you make it right." At the aircraft door, Sandra paused and looked back one final time at seat 14B, where Harold Mitchell had been sitting 2 hours ago when this all started. The seat was empty now, but the impact of what had happened there would ripple outward for years. Policy changes, training programs, consent decrees, and maybe, eventually, a culture where people like. Harold knew their behavior had consequences, and people, like Sandra, didn't have to become warriors just to travel safely. Michelle put a hand on Sandra's shoulder as they stepped onto the jetway. You had 10 minutes of being powerless. Then you had 15 years of preparation ready to deploy. That's the difference between victims and victors. Sandra smiled, touching her bruised cheek one last time. Harold had 10 minutes of power. I have a 15-year career. That's the real difference. Behind them, Flight 1847 would eventually depart. 3 hours late, with one fewer passenger, and 200 witnesses who'd learned that silence has a price and justice sometimes arrives exactly when you call for it. The story would spread beyond that aircraft, beyond that airport, beyond that day. It would become a training video, a legal precedent, a reminder that power imbalances can shift in an instant when preparation meets opportunity. And somewhere in Chicago, Harold Mitchell sat in a holding cell, finally understanding that the 10 minutes he'd spent feeling powerful had cost him everything, while the woman he'd slapped had spent 15 years making sure that moments like this would lead not just to personal justice, but to systematic change. The slap heard around the cabin became the case that changed an airline. Sandra Davis made sure of that.